Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. KC, or Killer Chick, is Kim Campbell's call sign. Kim's story is one of inspiration for all of us. She graduated from the Air Force Academy and realized her dream of becoming a fighter pilot in A-10s. She went on multiple deployments, flying hundreds of missions. But it was a mission over Baghdad that really tested her. Her A-10 was hit by a missile. Would she eject or try to make it back to the airfield in a heavily damaged plane? What lessons come out of such an experience, and how might they translate into your life? Kim's book, Flying in the Face of Fear, details her career and offers lessons on leading with courage. Today, she shares part of her story with us. Casey, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I just retired after 24 years in the Air Force. I spent time primarily as an A-10 pilot, supporting our troops on the ground. But I also spent time as a leader and commander of teams, both small teams and large teams. And I was able to finish out my career at the Air Force Academy as the director for the Center for Character and Leadership Development. So that's a little bit about the past story. And now I have transitioned into a new chapter, and I'm currently a keynote speaker, a leadership coach, and I am the author of a brand new book called Flying in the Face of Fear, A Fighter Pilot's Lessons on Leading with Courage.
I loved your book. I think all the stories in the book are great, but certainly the story that stands out is getting hit by a missile and bringing the plane back safely. Would you like to tell that story?
Yeah, kind of a defining moment in my life for sure, which is why the book starts there. This was back in 2003, which is crazy to me because it's been almost 20 years since that day. But I was tasked to fly a close air support mission, supporting our troops on the ground over Baghdad. And we got a call pretty quickly that our troops were taking fire. They needed immediate assistance, and we had to get in there as quickly as possible. We immediately proceeded over the target area, and unfortunately, there was cloud cover all over Baghdad, so we couldn't see the battle that was going on below. But we had a very good picture of what was going on based on talking to a ground controller. And we knew we had to get in there as quickly as we could. So we flew right over the target area. And then my flight lead looked down, he found a hole in the clouds, and he just disappeared through. And then it was my turn, and found a hole in the clouds and dove through. As soon as I got down below the weather, I could instantly see this firefight. There were bright flashes and smoke and tracers going back and forth across the Tigris River. I mean, it was kind of surreal for a second because it was everything that we trained for and planned for. And then suddenly I could start to see these puffs of gray and white smoke and bright flashes in the air right next to my cockpit. And I realized not only is there this firefight happening now back and forth across the river, but now the enemy is shooting up at us too. But we had a mission to do. So we continued on. We decided we were going to do just a couple weapons passes to be able to take some pressure off our friendly troops, and then climb up and reassess. And then as I was coming off my last target pass, I just felt and heard a loud explosion at the back of the airplane. And I knew immediately I was hit. The jet nosed over and pointed down at Baghdad below. I pulled back on the control stick, just instinctively pulled back on the stick, and absolutely nothing happened. I remember seeing the ground getting closer and knowing that I might have to eject. And then it was just training kicked in. I had briefly glanced down at the ejection handles and thought that that was the last thing I wanted to do. And so I quickly tried to analyze the situation, figure out what's going on and what I can do. And figured out very quickly that I had lost all the hydraulics on my airplane, and really only had two options at this point. One was ejecting, which I didn't want to do. And the other was going into our backup emergency system. And so thankfully I was able to flip that switch and it worked exactly as advertised. And my airplane was slowly climbed up away from Baghdad. And that was really the first moment I thought I was going to survive that mission. Finally, a little bit of a deep breath.
When you go through something like that, you don't have time to think. Did it hit you afterwards how this could have gone?
Oh yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, I know I didn't have time to think about it. I mean, I didn't have time to ask for help. I didn't have time to open a checklist. But it's strange that in those, I don't know, we'll call it roughly 20 seconds from the point where I was hit to the point where I had enough wherewithal to kind of mention it over the radio that I was hit. I feel like there was kind of this where this time slows down. And I remember so many things in that moment of knowing that, being aware of how terrible the situation was and, thinking of, am I going to crash? Do I need to eject? Am I going to survive? I mean, these are split second thoughts, but I don't think it really hit me, honestly, until after I landed. And then the kind of the reality of what I had done, of what had happened, sunk in. And I think it was even well after I landed, like once the adrenaline wore off, I think that's when it really hit me, like one, that I could have died, and two, that I survived.
Was it hard to get into the plane again the next day or so?
It wasn't, but only because I got an emergency launch. We were on alert for what we call combat search and rescue, meaning that if another pilot gets shot down, that we will launch very quickly to go coordinate their rescue. And that next day after this mission, I was sitting on alert, which usually means that we rest, we sleep, we just kind of relax for a bit. And then the alarm sounded, and not a drill. We raced out to the jets and just got in the plane as fast as we could, made an immediate takeoff, and started trying to gather information about this pilot. So I didn't have time to think about it. I just got in the airplane. There was a pilot on the ground. He needed our help. And I knew those pilots were there for me the day before. So I was going to do the same for him. So a rough scenario, obviously, with a pilot on the ground. But for me, in terms of getting back in the airplane, it just made it, I was just focused on the mission, I think, more than anything, and not really concerned about getting back in the airplane.
You talk about a story that was told about flying in manual revision. It's revision, right?
Manual reversion.
Reversion. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think the stories in aviation are really important because it's a close-knit community. And through these stories, we learn so much.
Yeah.
We
truly do. I mean, I think back to being over Baghdad, and, once I got out of that immediate threat, I still had an hour to fly my airplane home. I mean, I still had an hour to hang on to this heavily battle damaged airplane and get it home. And that's a long time to think. But I did think about the pilots who came before me, and I was aware of their stories. I was aware of their experiences and the lessons we had learned in terms of flying an airplane in manual reversion. And then in making this decision of whether or not I was going to try to land it, I thought about the pilots who had come before me, and I knew about their experiences. I knew that we had lost a pilot on one of the attempts. We had lost an airplane on another. But there was a story with very similar damage to mine where the pilot was able to get the airplane on the ground. And so I knew about all these stories. I knew about how they flew the airplane and what they did and what worked and what didn't. And that is the power of sharing stories and sharing experiences, because even though those pilots weren't with me that day over Baghdad, those stories were. And I really think that's what helped me get home safely. One of the many reasons.
Has flying changed your perspective of the world?
Yes. I mean, that mission changed my perspective of the world, certainly. But I think, there's so many lessons that we learn from flying in terms of prioritization and trying to remain calm and composed under pressure, the ability to work as a team. For us, it's always about having a wingman by your side. So this idea of creating a wingman culture and being part of something that's big and important, more important than yourself. So yeah, I mean, it absolutely has changed my view on life and leadership and parenting, you name it. I think there's so many lessons that I've been able to pull from it.
What are the lessons that came from that specific mission over Baghdad?
There were several. I think the one for me that really stands out is the importance of having a wingman by your side. In that moment when I was over Baghdad and I at least got a little bit out on the radio that I had been hit, that my airplane had been hit. My flight lead, who I refer to as my wingman, but he immediately went into action. It was like he knew what to do. I mean, I was so overwhelmed by just trying to get the airplane under control. And he had this awareness and calmness and composure that I didn't have because he could see the bigger picture. He knew that the enemy was still shooting at us. So he wanted me to put out more chaff and flare from our countermeasure system. When I told him that I was in this backup system, he immediately understood kind of the severity of the situation and told me to fly west to try to get over the friendly so that if I had to eject, ideally kind of float down over the friendly location. But having him by my side to provide that mutual support, to provide the guidance and direction when I needed it in a way that I could understand, very clear and concise and correct in terms of what I needed to hear. I mean, that was critical. And then I think even following that on our way home, this whole way back, he's asking me how I'm doing and how I'm feeling and just trying to keep me focused and talking. And then he gave me the choice, right? He empowered me to make a decision about whether I would land the airplane or just fly it back to friendly territory and eject. And I mean, that must have been hard for him to just fully trust and give me the decision and give me the choice and empower me to make it and then just be confident in it. I mean, I think about that from a leadership perspective, but having somebody by your side that has your back, that's going to support you and encourage you in those difficult moments is probably the biggest thing that I take away from that mission.
And yet it was ultimately your decision no matter what.
Yeah, it was my decision. And, I would face the consequences, which, potentially that decision could have been the difference between life and death. And so it was a big decision. But I have to say, I was still nervous. Once I made the decision that I was going to try to land the airplane, there was still part of me that was nervous about it. I mean, it was a big decision, but I also felt very confident because of my training and preparation. Before the mission, really before the deployment, I had done the work. I had prepared. I had studied my aircraft systems. I knew what would happen if they failed. I studied the enemy's aircraft systems. Like I had done my research, I'd done my homework. I had really put in the work. But I had also practiced. I mean, we practiced for battle damage in our simulators. In pilot training, we learned a technique called chair flying, where we just sit in a chair and we visualize critical steps as if we're in the cockpit. So I had chair flown these kind of rides and these scenarios in my head visually. So that practice really, I think, better prepared me to deal with the stress and to take action in that moment. And then we had also, we'd really talked through these worst case scenarios. We had planned for contingencies. We briefed what happens if you get hit and have battle damage in our pre-brief. I mean, we talk about those worst case scenarios. So I think when I think back, like, how is it even possible? Like, I don't know if it's something that I ever thought I was capable of doing. So how did I do it? How did I make a decision? How did I feel confident in it? And I realized it's because I had prepared, I had practiced and planned for contingencies. That's how I felt confident in my decision, my training, my preparation, confident that I could land the airplane.
That training is just amazing. I'm actually a little jealous. I learned to fly in my mid-30s or so. And as a civilian, and I got bored with power, so I got into sailplanes and cross-country flying. And the stories were very important. But I so envy that atmosphere of intensity, of training, of practice, and the closeness that comes from those sorts of bonds.
Yeah, I mean, we work very hard to be good at what we do. But also I think what's unique about a fighter squadron is it's not about the individual, it's about the team. And so we each understood kind of the role we play and how we fit into the bigger picture. We recognize that we have to support each other, challenge each other, encourage each other to continue to work hard, to continue to train, because we want everyone to perform at their best. I mean, you never know when you're going to be over Baghdad someday and your wingman or you gets hit by an enemy missile. And so you want to be ready for those moments. You want your team to be ready for those moments so that when it matters, when it counts, we're able to react. And I think that's the value of that constant training and preparation, but also a team that pushes each other to be better.
How do you start to translate those intense emotional bonds, which really are based on life and death, frankly,
Yeah.
Into a corporate world where I think the common denominator is more monetarily driven?
Yeah, monetarily or perhaps just livelihoods, right? I mean,
Yeah.
true lives from a stake of life or death situations aren't necessarily at stake anymore, but livelihoods are. I mean, this is how people live and support their kids and their families and do the things that they want to do in life. And so I think sometimes we downplay that, but I think, especially as leaders have a big responsibility for taking care of their team, and creating a culture where the team can be successful because livelihoods are on the line in these cases. But how do you create that bond in an environment where maybe it's not life or death? I mean, I still think it comes down to really the key thing is trust. And how do you create trust on a team where people feel safe to provide feedback and share lessons learned, where people are willing to raise their hands with new ideas, to try new things, to admit mistakes, to hold each other accountable. It's all about trust. And I think that's the basis of, if I'm struggling at work one day, if my coworker is going to have my back and pick up the slack, that feels pretty good, and why are they going to do that? Well, we have an environment of trust. Maybe I've done it for them before. I think it is possible to create it. It's just, it's based on something different. It's based on livelihoods. It's based on support for each other. It is based on cultivating this environment of trust. We like to call it a wingman culture, right? Where we're always looking out for each other and supporting each other. This idea that by lifting others, that you elevate the performance of the team.
One of the concepts that came out of your book that I really liked was the debrief.
Yeah.
Do you practice that personally? And that obviously translates into the corporate world.
I love a debrief. I love a debrief after we host a gathering at our house. I love a debrief after I've had a conversation with my teenager. And they aren't as extensive as a fighter pilot debrief, but in a fighter pilot debrief, we walk in there and the whole point is we talk about our objectives. We talk about where we met them and where we failed or made mistakes. We talk about those things that we did well so that we can repeat them again. But I think the other unique thing is that we check our rank at the door. So the youngest members, the least experienced members can provide feedback to the more senior members in the flight. And then we really drill down to the mistakes and really continue to ask the question why something happened. What was the root cause of the mistake? Really just not the easy answer to blame someone or blame something. It is, let's really drill down into why the mistake was made, identify what lessons we can learn, and then probably most importantly is what are we going to do differently the next time? So it's all great if we can learn the lessons, but if we don't change our behavior, that's part of the problem. But I have found that this technique works in my personal life and my professional life, and it can be quick, right? It can just be, how did that go? What do we think? What could we do differently? Just kind of really thinking through it. So I've used it in my personal life. I use it with my kids, help them through scenarios and things. But I think a debrief is so powerful because we are going to make mistakes, right? There are going to be failures. And so the whole point is that we learn from them.
There's a business in this, just the debrief alone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The debrief is because you really can get into the specifics. I mean, debriefs can last hours if you want them to, but you don't have to. And there can go very in depth on all the things that we can learn and pull from them. So that next time when we do something again, next time we hold a convention, next time we have a negotiation, that we kind of go back and pull those lessons learned to make sure that we actually do something different.
And that just goes to a learning culture, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Two of the traits that definitely come to the forefront in your book are courage and resilience.
Yeah.
And tell the story, if you would, about applying to the academy, because I think that it's a great story for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely some resilience there. when I was in fifth grade, I decided that I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I was going to go to the Air Force Academy, become a fighter pilot, and eventually with this goal of becoming an astronaut. And I put everything I had into going to the Air Force Academy. I mean, I did everything I could. I worked hard in school. I got good grades. I was into sports. And I did everything. I thought I had done all the things needed. And instead of getting that long awaited acceptance letter, I got a rejection letter instead. And that was crushing. I mean, it was everything that I had worked for. I had worked so hard. My heart wasn't in doing anything else. And I think in that moment, I realized how, I could have gone one of two ways, right? I could have just quit on my dream because of that word no, or I could keep going, which is what I did. And thankfully, I had parents and coaches and teachers and mentors around me who really pushed me and inspired me and said, Kim, if this is what you want, don't quit. And I didn't. I decided to write letters to the Air Force Academy every week, letting them know that I was interested in what I had done to improve, or, anything that I could do to increase my chances of getting accepted. It turns out my SAT scores weren't that great, not very competitive. And so I eventually took the ACT. I sent them those scores. I did everything that I could. If I could do more push-ups, more pull-ups, an A on a test, you name it. I just made sure that they were aware. And eventually, a few weeks before I was to report for basic training, I got that long-awaited acceptance letter, which was awesome. But I often think back to what if I had quit? What if I had given up? And I think about all the opportunities that I would have missed. So it was a very early lesson in persevering through challenges, overcoming adversity, but also the importance of having people around you who will support you during those tough times. And having the courage to get back up again when you face that rejection, when things are not going your way, to keep after it.
What happened to your dream of becoming an astronaut?
Oh, it's still there. I have to admit, I really loved flying the A-10. I really loved the mission. So there was part of me that wasn't ready to give that up. I think from a family perspective, if I had taken that turn and pivot in my career to go to test pilot school, which was ideally how I would go on to become an astronaut, I think it would have caused a pretty significant amount of separation for my husband and I, who was also in the Air Force, also an A-10 pilot. And we were also at the point where we were ready to have kids. And so I think it was just this reprioritization of what we wanted in life. And don't get me wrong, I would still love to go to space one day, which is now seeming more realistic these days. But it was just a turning point, a pivot really, of reprioritizing and realizing that sometimes it is okay to change our priorities and to find a new passion and purpose.
Did you find any special challenges being a woman in the military and a woman pursuing the type of career you did?
I think some of the challenges were challenges and pressure that I put on myself. I mean, I got to the Air Force Academy and there were 16% women there. And I knew I had to prove myself. I knew I had to work hard. My dad made sure, he was an Air Force Academy graduate as well. There were no women at the school when he went there. And so he made sure that I was going to be ready when I got to the Air Force Academy, physically, mentally, that I was going to be tough and ready to handle it. And what I found was that, in all reality, I just had to show up and work hard and prove myself physically and mentally, and no one else really cared. And that really translated to the time, once I became a fighter pilot, and now I'm walking into my fighter squadron on day one, and I am the only woman in the squadron in terms of being a fighter pilot. I think the pressure was pressure that I put on myself, right? That I felt like if I made a mistake or I failed in some way, that I would ruin it for the women that followed me. But that's the pressure I put on myself. I mean, nobody else said that. I think they just wanted me to prove that I was credible and capable in the airplane, just like any other new wingman to the squadron would have to do. But the truth was, once I proved that I could fly the airplane just like everybody else and meet the standards and, prove myself in combat, the jet doesn't know the difference. And the guys in my squadron didn't care about the difference either. They just cared that I was credible and capable.
Yeah, I think the competency issue is the key to that. And I think once you prove that, there's nothing more to prove.
No. And it's, at that point, it's just like, okay, let's move on. I mean, I think there was just initially it was just almost I don't know, discomfort maybe, or it was like they just didn't know what to think or how to act or what to say. And I remember sitting down for one of my first briefings before we were flying, and the pilot that I was flying with, an older gentleman, older pilot, and he said, "Kim, I just want you to know I've never flown with a girl before." And I thought, well, I'm not that different. So I told him, I said, "Sir, I don't think we're going to have a problem here. I might sound different or look different, but other than that, I think we should be okay."
And obviously you were.
I think so. I think it turned out okay.
What advice would you have for young women entering the workforce in general and in entering the military with a path towards becoming a fighter pilot?
Well, I would say first off, it's got to be something that you want to do. It's got to be a path that you are choosing, not that someone else is choosing for you, because it's a lot of work. But I think, and what I would tell any young person today is go work hard, have a good attitude, be credible, put in the work. And, your attitude makes a difference. So when you face mistakes, when you fail along the way, because you likely will, then you need to prove that you can get back up and get back into the fight. Learn from those lessons. Don't do them again, but move on and get better. I think that's really the key in any career field, no matter what you're going to do.
I often ask people to rewrite if they would like to rewrite their story, but I'm not asking you that. I want you to, I can't imagine you would want to you might not want to get almost shot down over Baghdad again, but.
You're right. I mean, I wouldn't want to rewrite it. I think all of those hard things made me better at doing hard things. Like, I wouldn't change it. I think all of those experiences made me who I am today. And yeah, so it's not like I have regrets. I have some serious learning that has happened along the way, for sure, though.
Well, and I think that when you face stressful situations and you show courage, the more you do it, the more capable you are of doing it again.
Yeah, every hard thing made me better at doing hard things. Every time I could get knocked down and get back up again, I felt stronger. I felt more confident that I could do it. It was all the preparation, the practice, the planning for contingencies, all of those things gave me confidence. I became more capable, but it gave me confidence to do it again.
Was there ever a moment when you doubted things?
Multiple times. I mean, I think I had doubts when I got that rejection letter from the Air Force Academy. I had doubts when I started pilot training. I mean, finally I made it. I'm at pilot training and I got airsick for like 3 weeks. And I doubted, is this the path for me? Is this what I'm meant to do? I mean, it was miserable, but I realized that it was absolutely what I wanted to do. And so, yeah, those doubts do creep in. Anytime I, didn't perform as well as I wanted, there's always that little sense of inner doubt. Can I make it? Can I do it? Will I make it through this? And it's just reminding yourself that, yeah, if you put in the work, you can. But I think doubts are normal. It's part of the process. It's probably what pushed me harder. Anytime I had that doubt, it was like, all right, I'm going to work a little harder. I'm going to study a little bit more.
Where will you be in 5 and 10 years?
That's a great question. I have no idea. I have 2 boys that are, they're 10 and 14. So we have a lot of growing left to do with them. And I think I would like to be doing a lot of what I'm doing now in terms of helping to teach and mentor kind of next generation leaders, current generation leaders that are looking for a new perspective. I really enjoy it. And also just to be available and around for my kids in a very defining, meaningful part of their lives. I've spent a lot of time away from family and friends over the past 24 years. So in my mind, I like what I want to be is more connected with the people around me that I care about.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.